Good morning. I hope these Friday Faith Phillips have been a help and a blessing to you and get you through the weekend a little bit. As I was preaching on Wednesday night, I had mentioned something that I was going to talk about this morning, and it comes in 1 Kings chapter 19. Of course, it's a very interesting passage. We find that Elijah is running from Jezebel, and as he does, God takes care of him, God provides for him. Most importantly, God met him in a cave. Now, there's a couple of verses in there that I want us to look at this morning that sometimes we look at it and we think, I think we know what it's saying, but when you put it into context, it's a really interesting message that I think we can all get a hold of. There's a couple of verses that I'd like to look at. Verse number 11, it says, "And he said, Go forth and stand up on the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake." Verse 12 says, "And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice." When you go back in the passage, you find that there was a lot of loud things, if you will, in Elijah's life. Really, I guess one loud thing, and that would have been the voice of Jezebel. As she said, after hearing what Elijah had done on Mount Carmel, and to the prophets of Baal, said that by this time tomorrow you're going to be a dead man. And he left because of that. The Bible tells us he fled when he saw that, or when he heard that. So he gets into this mountain, and he's here, or in this cave, and as he's in this cave, he's alone. He's in a sense desperate. You can read through the passage and see his desperation, feeling that he's the only one left. And God says to him, you're listening to what's loud. You're listening to an earthquake, a whirlwind, a fire. You're listening to those things. What you should be listening to is the still small voice. And as I stopped and I considered that, I turned inward quite a bit and looked at myself and thought, wow, I listened to a lot of the things that seem to be the loudest or seem to be the most pronounced, instead of listening to the still small voice. Well, I've heard that still small voice being described as the Spirit of God, and I do believe that there is an application there for that. But I think there's also some other things to consider, that Elijah already knew some things. He already knew that God was going to take care of him. Look at the life of Elijah. He knew it. He knew that God was watching out for him and could defeat armies on his behalf. But ultimately, he came to this place where he was, in a sense, away from faith. Because he was listening to those voices and listening to all of the trial that was there, instead of listening to what he already knew to be the truth and holding on to what he knew to be the truth. And ultimately, as we find in the passage, just listening to God. By faith, we ought to be living a life that when we hear all the loud noise, we hear the earthquake, we hear the whirlwind, we hear the fire, we hear all of those things, that we can step back and say, I need to take some time and I need to listen for that still small voice, the things that I know, but most importantly, the Holy Spirit. Hope to see you all on Sunday.